The storm outside was merciless. It was the kind of storm that made even the strongest walls groan under the weight of the wind. And Daniel sat alone in his small wooden house on the edge of the forest, listening to the angry voice of nature as if it were alive, as if it wanted to tear the world apart. And yet it was not the storm that truly unsettled him. It was the sound he thought he had heard, something faint, something weak, almost like a cry carried through the blizzard, a sound that did not belong to the wind or the trees, a sound that made the hairs on his neck rise. And for a long moment he wondered if he had imagined it, but then it came again, sharper this time. A fragile wail that cut through the roar of the storm. And without thinking, he rose from his chair and moved toward the door, every step heavy. With doubt, his mind racing with questions, who could be outside in such weather? Why would anyone be at his door so late? And why did that sound feel so unnatural, almost not human at all, but still filled with a helpless need that tugged at something deep inside him? Daniel hesitated at the door, his hand trembling as he gripped the old iron handle, and for a brief second he considered ignoring it, telling himself it was just the wind playing tricks. But the cry came again, softer now, weaker, like something fading away, and his heart clenched because whatever was out there was dying in the cold. Gosh. And he could not just let it happen. So he pulled the door open, and the storm rushed in. Icy air slashing at his skin, snow flying like sharp needles against his face. But all of that faded when he saw what was lying just at the threshold. A small shape curled in the snow, shivering violently, glowing faintly as if a weak light lived inside its body. And Daniel froze because it was not a child, not in the way his eyes expected. Its skin was pale and smooth like glass, almost translucent. Its eyes too large for its head, shimmering silver with fear. And its small hands had more fingers than they should have, delicate and trembling as it tried to cling to life. For a moment, Daniel simply stood there, his mind blank, his heart hammering. Every instinct screaming at him to shut the door, to run, to pretend he had never seen this thing. But then the creature, no, the baby. Because in that moment, despite all its strangeness, that was what it was. A baby opened its mouth and let out a broken cry that was so raw, so desperate, so filled with the same helplessness any human infant would carry. Daniel felt his chest ache, and he bent down without realizing, his hands shaking as he lifted the tiny being into his arms, feeling the strange heat radiating from its body.
Ow.
The light pulsing faintly like a dying ember, and he whispered to himself, "What? Are you?" Though the baby could not answer. He pulled the child against his chest, shutting the door quickly against the storm. The sound of the wind fading as silence returned, broken only by the weak whimpers of the creature now nestled in his arms, and Daniel could not believe what he had done, because he had just invited something alien, something impossible into his home. And yet, as he looked down at it, the fear did not outweigh the strange pull in his heart, a pull that told him this being needed him, that without him it would not survive the night. He carried it to the couch, wrapping it in a thick blanket, watching as its shivering slowed, its silver eyes blinking up at him with something that almost looked like trust. And Daniel felt his throat tighten, because this was no monster. This was something lost, something fragile, something that had been left on his doorstep, as if the universe itself had chosen him for reasons he could not understand. And though part of him wanted to scream, to throw the thing back outside, another part of him, the stronger part, could not let go. But just as he tried to calm his racing mind, a sound came from outside. Faint but distinct, not the wind, not the storm shadows moving in the snow, shapes that seemed to shift unnaturally. Figures too tall, too thin, walking slowly toward his house, and the baby's eyes widened in fear as it clutched the blanket tighter, a soft whimper escaping its mouth, and Daniel's breath caught in his chest, because he suddenly realized the truth. Whatever this baby was, it was not alone. And whoever or whatever had left it at his door had not left for good. Daniel stood frozen in the silence of his living room, his eyes locked on the small bundle resting in the blanket. The strange child breathing shallowly, its glowing skin casting faint shadows on the old wooden walls, and though he wanted to believed the storm outside was still the only danger. His gut told him otherwise. Because the noise he had just heard, the soft crunch of heavy steps moving through the snow, was too precise, too deliberate, too controlled to belong to the wild wind. And when he dared to peek through the frosted window, he saw them, dark silhouettes moving slowly between the trees. Tall and thin, like shadows stretched unnaturally, their limbs long and sharp, their heads bending from side to side as if they were scanning the ground for tracks, and his blood turned cold as he realized they were not human, not hunters from town, not neighbors, but something else entirely, and they were searching, closing in on his house with a patience that was even more terrifying than rage. Daniel stepped back from the window, his mind racing, his heart hammering so loudly he thought the baby might hear it, and he whispered to himself, "What have I brought into my home?" Yet when he looked down at the child wrapped tightly on his couch, its wide silver eyes staring up at him with fear too pure to be faked, he felt something anchor inside him, a need to protect, to fight back against whatever was coming, even though he had no idea what he was facing, even though the rational part of his mind screamed at him to open the door and throw the child back into the storm, to save himself before it was too late. But before he could even decide what to do, the baby moved, its tiny hands clutching at the blanket, its mouth opening as if trying to speak. And at first Daniel thought it was another cry, another strange sound too weak to mean anything. But then the words came, broken, uneven, but real words in a voice that trembled with fear. "They come for me." The sound nearly stopped Daniel's heart, because he had not expected it to speak. It's not in English, not in a language he could understand, and the weight of those words struck him like a stone, confirming his worst fear. The figures outside were here for the baby, and if they found it in his house, they would not leave him alive. Panic surged through him, every instinct screaming at him to move, and he quickly scooped the child back into his arms, holding it against his chest. Its faint glow seeping into his shirt, warming his skin, making him feel strangely both comforted and terrified at once. He turned off the single lamp in the living room, plunging the house into darkness, hoping the storm outside would cover any trace of light, then crept toward the back of the house, careful with every step as if the floorboards themselves might betray him. The baby's breaths came quick and shallow, tiny fingers clutching tightly at his collar as if it knew the danger was getting closer. And Daniel could feel his hands shaking as he reached for the basement door, pulling it open quietly, the old hinges groaning softly, but thankfully drowned out by the howling storm outside, and he slipped down into the dark basement, closing the door above him, his heart thudding in his ears as he moved blindly through the shadows, guided only by memory. The basement smelled of old wood and dust, filled with boxes he hadn't touched in years. But now it felt like the only place where the thin walls of his house might hide them. He sat in the farthest corner, cradling the baby close, trying to control his own breathing, listening intently to the sounds above, the crunch of footsteps drawing nearer, then stopping, then moving again, circling the house like predators, testing their prey, and for the first time in years, Daniel felt completely powerless, like a small animal caught in the dark, waiting for the claws to come through. Minutes stretched like hours, every sound amplified by fear, till finally the baby lifted its head and looked up at him, its silver eyes glowing brighter, its lips parting as if it wanted to speak again. And Daniel shook his head quickly, whispering, "No, don't make a sound." But it was too late. The faint hum of energy pulsed from its body, a vibration that made the air in the basement buzz softly. And for a moment, Daniel thought the baby was losing control, but then he realized it. It wasn't just noise. It was something else, something deeper, like a memory leaking out of the child into his mind. In an instant, images flashed before Daniel's eyes, strange ships burning in a black sky, towering cities collapsing under fire, creatures screaming as they fled, and in the middle of it all, it's the same baby being carried away, hidden, protected, sent far from home, as everything else was destroyed. Daniel gasped, his body trembling as the vision faded. And he looked down at the child with wide eyes, realizing this was not just a lost alien infant, it was a survivor of something much larger, something catastrophic and whoever was searching outside wanted it badly enough to cross light years to find it. Before Daniel could even process what this meant, the sound of his front door creaking open echoed faintly above, carried down through the floorboards, and his blood ran cold. I guess the hunters had entered his house, their tall shadows now. Inside, their movements slow but sure, as if they knew exactly where to search, and Daniel tightened his grip around the child. His back pressed against the basement wall, his mind screaming that there was nowhere left to run. The house was no longer his safe place, but a trap. Every creak of the old wooden floor above, reminding Daniel that intruders know. Hunters were moving closer with each passing second, and as he pressed his back to the cold basement wall, holding the strange glowing infant tightly against his chest, he felt the crushing weight of choices he had never imagined making in his quiet. Ordinary life, choices that now meant survival or death. The baby trembled in his arms, small fingers digging into his shirt with a desperation that was not human but still achingly familiar. And Daniel knew with certainty that if the hunters found them, neither he nor the child would live to see another dawn. The footsteps grew heavier above, slow and careful, as if the creatures were listening, calculating, and Daniel held his breath, forcing every muscle in his body to stay perfectly still, yet inside his head panic screamed for an escape that did not exist. Then, without warning, the baby shifted in his arms, its glowing eyes locking on him with an intensity that cut through the darkness. And before Daniel could whisper for it to stay silent, the same strange wave of energy pulsed from its small body, that same hum that seemed to bypass his ears and burrow straight into his mind, and suddenly his world changed. Flashes of memory struck him like lightning. An alien city filled with towering glass spires under two suns, skies filled with ships shaped like blades of light, and a people that looked like the child in his arms, elegant and fragile, yet filled with something powerful, something ancient. Then the visions twisted into horror flames raining down from above, ships exploding in the air, shadows tearing through streets as beings taller and darker than night ripped the city apart. And Daniel understood without words that this baby was not simply a refugee, not just a survivor of some cosmic war, but something more important, more precious, perhaps even the last of its kind. The images ended as quickly as they had come, leaving Daniel gasping quietly in the basement, sweat cold on his skin. The storm outside forgotten because the real storm was here, crawling through his house. He looked down at the child, his voice barely a whisper, trembling but urgent. "Who are you? Why are they after you?" The baby's lips moved again, forming clumsy shapes, struggling with the human tongue, and though the words were broken, Daniel understood them enough to make his blood run cold. Last, they kill. All. The weight of that confession nearly crushed him, because if the child was telling the truth, it was not only a target, but the final hope of an entire species, a symbol of survival that the hunters could not allow. To live, his hands tightened protectively around the infant, but his rational mind screamed back at him. What did this mean for Earth, for him, for anyone who came near? He was no soldier, no hero, just a man who wanted to live quietly in his cabin. Yet here he was, holding something that entire armies might burn worlds to reclaim. Upstairs, the sound of furniture scraping across the floor made him flinch. The hunters were tearing through his house, searching room by room, and it was only a matter of time before they found the basement door. He looked around desperately, scanning the shadows for options. His eyes fell on the old radio equipment stacked in the corner, dusty from years of disuse. Something his father had left him when he died, a relic from another era. He crawled toward it, setting the baby down gently on a blanket, twisting the old knobs with shaking hands, hoping against all reason that it might still work, that maybe he could call someone, anyone, for help. At first it sputtered only static, a low hiss that blended with the storm, but then the noise shifted, sharpened, and Daniel froze as a voice came through, distorted but chillingly clear. "Return the child. Earth will burn." The words echoed through the basement like a death sentence, and Daniel's hands fell away from the radio, his heart slamming in his chest as the baby whimpered softly, as if it too understood the threat. He whispered to himself, "No, This can't be real, but deep down he knew it was. And suddenly the storm outside felt small compared to the storm that had already arrived from the stars. The radio hissed again, repeating the message. Colder this time, more commanding, as though whoever was sending it knew exactly where he was. As though they could see him even now, and Daniel realized with horror that he was not just protecting the child from shadows outside his house. He was standing against something vast, something powerful enough to reach across the airwaves and threaten an entire planet for the sake of one fragile life. His mind screamed at him to give up, to surrender the baby, to open the basement door, and end this nightmare before it consumed everything. But when he looked into the child's glowing silver eyes, saw the way it clung to him with trust despite all its fear, he knew he couldn't. Because surrendering this life would be surrendering something greater, something innocent, something worth more than he could understand. The sound of heavy footsteps on the floor above grew louder, descending now toward the basement, the hunters moving with certainty. No longer searching but advancing, and Daniel tightened his grip on the child. His jaw set despite the terror clawing at his chest. He had no weapon, no plan, only a desperate need to keep the baby safe. But in that moment, he swore silently that he would not hand it over.
Pat!
Not to them, not to anyone, no matter the cost.
And then, as the first shadow fell across the crack beneath the basement door, the radio hissed one final time, the voice almost a whisper, cold and certain. This is your only warning. The night dragged on like a nightmare that refused to end. The storm outside still screaming through the trees. But Daniel no longer heard it the same way, because now the real storm was inside his home, moving slowly, hunting him with every careful step that pressed against the wooden floor above, clutched the alien baby tightly against his chest in the cold darkness of the basement. His mind still reeling from the voice that had come through the old radio, the voice that had spoken with such terrifying certainty, "Return the child, or Earth will burn." The words refused to leave him, echoing in his skull like a curse. And for the first time, Daniel realized that danger was not just to him, not just to his home, but to everyone on the planet. Whoever these beings were, they had the power to destroy worlds, and they were willing to use it if he didn't obey. Yet as the baby nestled closer, trembling but alive, silver eyes glowing faintly with trust, Daniel felt that same strange pull in his heart that had made him open the door hours ago. A bond he could not explain, one that told him surrender was impossible, even if it meant his own destruction. The hunters above moved with patience, overturning furniture, scraping claws against the floorboards. And Daniel's chest tightened as he heard their weight shift closer to the basement door. A long pause, as if they were listening to his very breath. He pressed his hand over the baby's mouth, praying it would stay silent. But the child only looked up at him, its gaze steady, as if it knew something he did not. For a long moment the house was still, every sound outside muffled by the storm, every heartbeat in Daniel's chest loud enough to betray him. And then, just when he thought the door would burst open, the footsteps began to retreat, slow and deliberate, moving back toward the front of the house, until finally he heard the creak of the front door opening again, and then nothing but the wind. Daniel waited, frozen in the dark, unwilling to believe they had truly left, but when minutes passed with no sound, only silence and the storm, he allowed himself to breathe, though his relief was thin and fleeting, because he knew they had not given up. They had simply chosen another path, one he could not yet see. Hours crawled by before the storm finally eased, the heavy winds breaking into softer flurries of snow, and Daniel dared to climb back upstairs, carrying the child carefully. His house a wreck of broken furniture and scattered belongings, proof of the hunter's search. He moved quickly, gathering food, blankets, and whatever supplies he could find. Because one truth had settled in his heart like stone, he could not stay here. The baby was a target, and as long as it was with him, anyone near him would be in danger, which meant the safest place for the child was also the most dangerous for him, anywhere but home. But as he packed, he noticed something that froze his hands mid-motion through the window. In the far distance over the forest, lights were moving across the sky. Not the blinking red of aircraft, not the falling glow of stars, but massive shapes, silent and steady, gliding against the horizon like shadows swallowing the dawn. His stomach twisted because he knew instinctively what they worships. Not of Earth, but of the same beings who had sent the warning, and if they were here, then the threat of burning Earth was not empty. The baby stirred in his arms, its glow pulsing faintly, and Daniel whispered, "They're already here, aren't they?" The child gave no answer, but its trembling grew stronger, as if it could feel the weight of the ships above. Daniel's first thought was to run to the authorities, to drive into town and hand everything over to the government, to let trained people handle what he never should have been part of. But then, another voice, the rational yet fearful voice, in his head, asked could he even trust them? If the government got the child, would they protect it or dissect it, experiment on it, turn it into a weapon? He remembered the baby's memories, the fire, the destruction, the fear of being hunted. And something inside him told him he could not hand it over to anyone, not yet. As the first rays of gray dawn touched the forest, Daniel started his old truck, loading the baby and the supplies, his hands shaking as the engine coughed to life. He drove down the long, icy road, the silence of the forest broken only by the crunch of tires, but the further he went, the more he realized the world itself was changing, strange hums in the air, distant flashes on the horizon, whispers on the radio that spoke of lights over major cities, sudden blackouts, unexplained events the government dismissed as nothing but storms. People didn't know the truth yet, but Daniel did, and it made the drive feel like moving through the last calm before a storm too large to survive. By midday he reached the edge of town, parking in the shadows behind an old warehouse, his mind racing with questions and no answers. He needed help, but he couldn't trust strangers, and while he debated what to do, a black van pulled quietly into the lot, its windows tinted, its movement deliberate. Daniel froze, pulling the baby close, ready to run, but the van door slid open and two figures stepped out. Not hunters, not alien, but human men in dark coats. Their faces stern, their eyes sharp. One of them lifted a hand slowly, speaking in a low voice that carried across the empty lot. "Daniel, we know what you found, and we know what it means." Daniel's breath caught, his stomach tightening because he had never seen these men before, yet they knew his name, and worse, they knew about the baby. The taller man stepped forward, his voice firm but not unkind. "You can't run from this. That child is not just a visitor. It is a key, and every power on earth and beyond is coming for it." Daniel backed toward the truck, torn between fear and the faint hope that maybe these strangers were allies, maybe they could help him protect the child. But before he could speak, the baby tensed in his arms, its glow brightening suddenly, and a sharp pulse of energy rippled out from its small body, spreading across the lot like a shockwave, instantly shutting down the van, the truck, every light. Every machine plunging the entire block into silence and darkness. Daniel gasped, clutching the child as the two men staggered, their eyes wide in shock. And in that moment, he realized the truth. The baby wasn't just a symbol, wasn't just an heir of some broken people. It carried a power strong enough to stop the world. The blackout in the town lasted only minutes, but for Daniel, every second stretched into eternity. His heart pounding as the strange energy from the baby hummed through the air, leaving machines dead, lights dark, and a strange silence that felt heavier than any storm he had ever experienced. And as he looked down at the child, its silver eyes now glowing steadily, he realized the baby was not just alive, not just an innocent being in need of protection, but something far greater than he had ever imagined. Because the pulsing energy seemed to carry thoughts, images, and warnings straight into his mind, showing him fragments of worlds and civilizations he had only dreamed about in science fiction. Worlds burning, cities collapsing under alien fire, skies filled with ships unlike anything Earth had built. And in the middle of all of it, the baby, small and fragile. Yet somehow, at the center of every vision, the key to survival, the last hope for a species on the brink of extinction. He staggered back, holding the baby close, whispering, "What? What are you?" And in that instant, the world around him seemed to shift. The energy from the child radiating warmth and fear at the same time carrying emotions too complex. For human language, memories of a race at war, desperate flights through the galaxy, and a single goal: survival. And Daniel understood painfully and clearly that the hunters, the shadowy ships above, even the men who had approached him in the lot, were all pieces of a battle far beyond Earth, and that this planet was now caught in the middle, a pawn in a war it had never known existed. He realized with a sinking heart that the child had been sent to Earth for safety, left behind as a last refuge while its homeworld was destroyed by enemies who would stop at nothing to reclaim it. And every instinct screamed at him that protecting this child was no longer just a moral choice. It was a responsibility that could determine the fate of millions, if not billions of lives. The men from the van were not just curious observers. They were a secret government division, one that had been monitoring extraterrestrial signals for decades, waiting for proof that life beyond Earth was real, and now they had found it in the form of the glowing baby Daniel held, whose very presence carried secrets, technology, and power beyond human understanding. Daniel's mind raced as he tried to process everything at once, realizing the gravity of the choice before him: hand over the child to the government, risking experiments, exploitation, and perhaps doom, or keep the child hidden, risking the wrath of the hunters, alien warships, and any other force that would come to claim it. The baby shivered in his arms and, to his astonishment, whispered again, words so simple yet carrying a weight that struck him in the chest. They fight coming. Fast. The vision from the child's mind sharpened, showing him fleets of alien warships crossing the solar system. Silent shadows gliding through space, scanning planets, seeking the baby, and Daniel felt the terror of humanity itself pressed onto his shoulders, the knowledge that if he failed, Earth could become collateral damage in a war it had no part in. He glanced at the men from the van. Their faces told him what their words could not. They knew the truth, understood the danger, yet waited for Daniel to decide. The responsibility to rest in his hands, and the weight of that responsibility was almost unbearable. As he clutched the child, trying to calm both himself and the baby, a sudden wave of energy pulsed from the child again, stronger this time. And Daniel felt the visions more vividly, the alien race's memories flooding his mind. A peaceful world, torn apart by enemies who sought power, families destroyed, cities erased. And the baby, the last of its kind, dripped from safety and sent to Earth as a fragile hope for survival. Daniel's breath caught in his throat as he realized that every choice he made now could tip the balance. That protecting the child meant defending humanity from consequences it could not yet understand. And letting it fall into the wrong hands could ignite a war that would sweep across the stars, destroying more than he could ever imagine. And then, just as he began to weigh his impossible options, a sudden pulse of energy shot from the baby into Daniel's mind. Not terrifying this time, but filled with clarity, pointing him toward a place, a direction, a plan, and he realized that the child was trying to guide him, to help him survive and make the right choice, though what that choice would entail, he could not yet know. The men from the van stepped closer, urgency in their eyes, speaking quickly now, explaining that alien warships had been detected entering Earth's orbit, that the child's presence alone was enough to trigger them, and that Daniel had minutes, perhaps only moments, to act before the situation became catastrophic. And as the baby's glow intensified in response to the approaching threat, Daniel understood the unimaginable truth. This child, so small, so fragile, so helpless to the human eye, carried the power to save or destroy not just its own race, but the planet he had always called home, and every second wasted was a second closer to global annihilation. As he turned toward the men, ready to demand answers, to find a plan to act, the baby lifted its tiny head and stared at him with eyes that seemed impossibly old, impossibly wise, and whispered a single word, almost a command, almost a plea: protect. And Daniel knew, without doubt, that no matter the cost, no matter the danger, no matter the forces arrayed against him, he would follow that word, because it was now the only thing that mattered on at that very moment. In the sky above, the first of the alien warships broke through the clouds, It was enormous and silent, its dark shape blotting out the sunlight. And Daniel felt the ground tremble beneath him as the war for the baby and the planet was about to begin. The sky above Earth burned with shadows. Alien warships so massive they blotted out the sun, floating silently yet menacingly. And Daniel stood in the ruined warehouse lot, cradling the glowing baby in his arms, feeling the weight of the world pressed down on him as though the planet itself rested on his shoulders, and every heartbeat of the child sent ripples through the air, waves of energy that hummed with both promise and danger. He could hear the soft hums of the alien ships, feel the tension in the ground beneath him, and he knew that the moments left to act were slipping away faster than he could breathe, faster than any plan he might make could save them. Yet he refused to falter, because in the silver eyes of the child he saw trust, hope, and the same determination that had kept it alive across the stars, and that alone steeled his nerves. The men from the van, the secret division, who had guided him this far, stood back, unsure whether to intervene or leave the decision entirely in Daniel's hands, and he realized painfully that no human force could fight what was coming, yet not without the child's help. He took a deep breath, the icy wind of the outskirts whipping through his hair, and whispered, "We can't let them take you." "We won't let anyone hurt you," and the baby responded, its glow brightening, a warm pulse that seemed to synchronize with his own heartbeat. Then the ships above shifted, their massive hulls descending toward Earth's surface, casting darkness across cities, forests, and oceans alike, a reminder that failure was not an option. That hesitation could mean annihilation, and Daniel felt the terror claw at his chest, but alongside it came clarity. This was not just survival. This was choice, and the baby had chosen him to make it. With every ounce of courage he possessed, Daniel stepped into the open lot, holding the baby high, exposing himself to the terrifying eyes of the invaders. And as the first beam of alien energy fired down toward him, the baby's glow flared violently, a blinding light that rippled outward like a storm of energy, throwing back the force, bending it harmlessly around them. And Daniel felt a warmth surge through him, strange connection between the child and himself, as if they were one. The alien ships halted, their lights scanning, and Daniel realized with awe that the child was communicating not with words, but with energy, showing the invaders that it was not helpless, that any attack would be met with a power beyond comprehension, a power fueled by life, survival, and determination. As seconds stretched into eternity, the baby's glow expanded, casting light across the city skyline, the force pushing back against the ships, lifting debris, snapping power lines and arcs of energy that danced harmlessly around Daniel and the child. And in that moment, he understood fully this small being carried the essence of a world, a civilization, and perhaps the key to peace between species. The secret division men watched in stunned silence, realizing the scale of what they had witnessed, that Daniel and the baby together had unleashed a force that no weapon, no fleet, could hope to challenge, and yet Daniel felt no pride, only a fierce protective determination, a realization that the child's power was a gift, a responsibility, and a bond that he would honor no matter the cost. Above, the alien ships began to retreat, as if acknowledging defeat or recognizing that the child could not be taken without catastrophic loss. And Daniel's hands shook as he held the baby closer, whispering softly, "It's over. You're safe." We did it, though he knew the war was only paused, not ended, and that danger still lurked in the shadows of the galaxy, waiting for the right moment to strike. The baby's glow softened, pulsing gently now, and it reached a tiny hand up to Daniel's face, touching him with something that felt almost human, almost familial, and Daniel's chest tightened as he whispered, "Family," realizing that, in this strange, impossible moment, despite all the fear, destruction, and alien war, they had found a connection, a bond that transcended species, distance, and logic. As he looked up at the sky, watching the alien warships vanish into the clouds, Daniel knew that Earth had been given a chance, a pause, and that the child had chosen him not just as protector, but as a partner, a link between worlds and in the soft warmth radiating from the baby, he felt hope, courage, and a quiet promise that the universe, despite all its dangers, had a future yet to be written. And in the fading light, with the wind whispering through the trees and the city beginning to stir from the blackout, Daniel held the alien child close, whispered one last time, "No matter what comes, I'll protect you." And the baby's eyes met his with a clarity and depth that made him understand. Finally, that they had survived, not by luck, not by force, but because of trust, courage, and the impossible choice to fight for what was right. And as the first stars began to pierce the twilight sky, a single thought settled in Daniel's mind, steady and unwavering. This was only the beginning.